Hi, it's Michael and Anthony here presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for the current challenges, but also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week, with Anthony Turner from the Small Business Mentoring Service, we'll interview a different small business expert or a fellow business owner and get them to share their best tips and insights for you, the listeners. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and is heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. Thanks also to our supporters, Kerr Capital and the Small Business Mentoring Service. Okay, so welcome to another edition of Small Business Banter. Want to welcome in today Malcolm Campbell, who's as a lawyer, he's part of Coleman Greig's commercial advice team, but Malcolm will tell you a little bit about himself and what they do there. Welcome in, Malcolm.
Thanks very much, Michael.
And also, as usual, Anthony Turner, co-host from the Small Business Mentoring Service. Good morning and welcome, Anthony.
Thanks, Michael. Nice to be back again.
Sure is. Thanks for coming in, Malcolm. It was really, we had a quick chat the other day. There's a lot of, there's been a lot of fallout, following COVID-19, leading to some, real challenges for some small business operators. So we want to talk about dealing with some of those issues like, financial banks, landlords, et cetera. But could you just give us a little bit about yourself and the firm you work for? You're based up in Sydney?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, thanks for having me on today. It's fantastic to be involved in these sorts of programs. But look, I'm a principal lawyer and director of Coleman Greig Lawyers. We're a Sydney-based law firm. We've got 5 offices around the Sydney metropolitan area. So head office out in the Greater West in Parramatta, CBD, Norwest, Penrith, and Southwest down at Oran Park.
Okay. And what's the sort of, in terms of SMEs, what's the kind of work you're typically doing with SMEs, small businesses?
Yeah, so my whole background really has been growing up working in an SME and then advising and assisting SMEs for most of my career, and it's really only been in the last short period of time that I've had exposure to larger corporate clients. So I'm really providing advice through the whole business life cycle for SMEs. So whether it's establishment, teething problems as they grow, or then as they get into the mature phase of business, providing any sort of advice that a business is going to need just in their day-to-day operation. So it really canvasses a very broad range of issues.
Yeah, Malcolm, great to have you on board. Just interested in, with all of the impacts of COVID-19, retailers closing, landlords having difficulties, financial difficulties, things like that many, many people around the country can relate to. What are some of the legal issues that are coming up around that sort of scenario?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I think what we're seeing at the moment is a real dichotomy in the market. We're having absolute winners out of COVID. There's some businesses that are just going gangbusters, which is a bit of an unanticipated or unexpected outcome of COVID. But then unfortunately and sadly for many businesses at the other end of the spectrum, things are a bit tight. Things are tough. Certainly bricks and mortar retail, yes, they've been hit hard. Hospitality is a very clear industry. Anything to do with travel or hospitality have really been hurt hard, and it's the big headline expenses, fixed overheads that businesses have that they're really struggling with. People often think about staff as an overhead, But they're actually, and thanks to a lot of the support that the governments, both state and federal, have put in place, they've become a more manageable variable expense for business. It's more things like, as you mentioned, rent, which is often a fixed overhead, and other costs that are becoming harder and harder for businesses to manage.
Yeah. On that, the overhead thing, and particularly with rent, what's your advice to some of those challenge businesses? I want to come back to the businesses that are winning or are doing well. I'm sure they've got their legal issues as well, or their commercial issues. But with the businesses that are struggling, you overheads, e.g., or staff, maybe that's more flexible, variable, better, easier to manage. But with rent, what's your high level advice to a business that is contemplating how the hell do I do something about this lease or this rent in this current environment?
Look, I think the first thing to do is not bury your head in the sand. Okay, I mean it's reality. Whether you like it or not, things are tough, and as is the case in life and in business, you just can't. If you ignore an issue, it will just get bigger on you. It will not go away. So I would say early communication with either the agent, or if you're dealing with your landlord directly, your landlord, because you will find that there are actually very many reasonable landlords out there. And if you have early communication with them, you might even be able to come up with an arrangement that they're very happy.
In some of the states, Malcolm, I noticed that, like in Victoria, where I'm based, we've got the Small Business Commissioner here, and their office actually has a remit across the top of retail leasing, so that they're sort of a first point of call. Is that the same in other states, or how does that work?
Yeah, certainly in New South Wales, that's exactly the same. There's a Small Business Commission, and also there's the Commercial Leasing Code of Conduct that was introduced right at the start of COVID, which provided a framework for lessees or tenants to seek relief from their landlords when they were impacted by COVID. So we have an expert property team here, and they've been run off their feet dealing with those things during the 2020 calendar year. It's sort of plateaued out a bit now. People have found their feet a little bit more with things now. But yes, there are a lot of government services like small business commissioners that can assist. They will often mediate these problems. So you don't necessarily need to incur lots in terms of legal costs or those sorts of things. There are sort of self-help services out there where you can bring the parties together and just have a sensible discussion.
I think that's really great for our listeners to know about those sort of things, because I think sometimes, and no disrespect to lawyers, we've all got to make a living, but there is sort of a fear of fairly high costs associated with legal, and legal can be very expensive depending on how deep you dive into the disputes.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things, it's almost like it's a bit of a taboo subject for clients and sometimes for lawyers alike. But, my background is coming up through and then eventually owning a small law firm myself. So I get it. I get the pressures of running business. I get that it's not always, smelling roses. So and I think a lot of good commercial lawyers, no matter what type of practice they are in, have a passion for business and therefore understand how difficult things are. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the business owner saying to your lawyer, look, I need to manage my costs sensibly. And I generally, and the team here at Coleman Greig also have the approach of, look, let's make sure you get the best value for money. And if there's a free service out there that can do what we were going to do, use the free service, because there is a place where you may need our services that there isn't that free resource. So use the free, cheap or reduced cost service where you can. Absolutely.
Yeah, provided that that free service is a quality service. I mean, there's it's a bit of a trap, and I think particularly when you're under financial pressure or other pressure to ask around, which is we'd encourage that, but also to use your judgment as to who you actually listen to.
So Anthony's organisation, Small Business Mentoring Service, as an example, is an excellent organisation for free and low cost mentoring for business owners who are struggling. But you mentioned something interesting there, Malcolm. You merged your own practice into Coleman Greig, I think.
Yes.
So you've transitioned. You were a solo lawyer, and then
interesting story. I mean, I started off my career in that small practice. I actually had an economics degree, no legal qualifications. Came in as a clerk. Loved the work so much that I then went and did my legal qualifications. Worked my way up through management there. The founder of the firm was a sole practitioner at the time. Went into partnership with him. Eventually ended up buying him out. Sole practitioner for myself for a while. Then I brought a good friend and colleague in, Luke Mitchell, who is with me now here at Coleman Greig as a principal as well. We operated that business for about 5 years together quite successfully. And then, without sort of any warning, Coleman Greig came knocking on our door. They were looking for a bit of a succession plan with some older practitioners that were, after 35 years of practice, were moving into retirement. And it was just one of those things, right time, right place. And I'm very happy to report that it's all gone as smoothly as possible, and we're really enjoying the new environment.
It's a good thing to I think for any owner out there to seek out some support. Doesn't need to necessarily be a merger like yourself, but it's in having those discussions and talking to other owners that you or advisors that you can stop that feeling of being completely alone.
I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the great tools for any business operator is, and there's a plethora of them out there now, but small business networking groups or chambers or mentoring services. I mean, I'm a member of one myself. When I first sort of went from junior lawyer into management, I had no idea what I was doing running a business. I had no formal education around running a business, and I just wanted to learn from others. So, you join these groups, you go, you listen to other people's experiences. It doesn't matter if it's in the same area of business as your business or not. You learn from people and you learn from their experiences. So I can't encourage that enough.
No, you share the load, don't you? Because that feeling of going home from a small business and it's challenging. You've got staff to manage, and you've got relationships personal to manage, and often there's not the right time. Owners can feel like can't put these difficulties, can't discuss them with staff, and don't want to share the problems at home. So, and it really does get very, very lonely. So, those networking,
it can be a lovely, rewarding, inspiring environment, but it can be a really lonely one too, for all of the reasons that you've just said.
Yeah. And by the way, on today's edition of Small Business Banter, we're talking with Malcolm Campbell from Coleman Greig. Thanks for the input so far, Malcolm. Wanted to come back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, or you mentioned a little bit earlier. There are some businesses doing extremely well post COVID, which, as you say, was a little unexpected. But in terms of they're going to have their growth problems or different sets of challenges. Are you seeing what are some of the? Because it's the same. You can't. Growth has a cost. Success has a cost. And what are some of the things that you're seeing? Their challenges. Good financials, perhaps, but some other operating or other challenges.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think big picture, the speed and ease of obtaining finance to expand. So you might be doing really well off the back of COVID in terms of your trading, but you've then got a cash flow shortage. You want to maybe expand extra premises, more staff, more equipment, whatever it might be. But the finance sector is probably, the banks won't tell you this, but it's still fairly tight in terms of the lending regime, and it can be slow. So then you can have deals and opportunities present themselves to you, but it can be hard to make that all happen in this current environment. It's like everything else is trying to catch up to those businesses that are doing, exceptionally well.
And that's despite a lot of marketing that maybe you get a different impression of how much money is available at record low rates.
That's right. And it's not just about the rate. It's about those other conditions of borrowing around, well, what security are you putting up? And those sorts of things. It doesn't matter if you get a lot of money at a low rate now. If you've put up your house and then rates go up and things tighten up, it might have seemed like a good idea back then, but it's not all. You can't always accept the advertising on the front window.
Yeah, Malcolm, interesting point. You're talking about the financials there, but I mean, there's certainly some other sort of key pieces of legal protection that business owners can and need to put in place, but often don't. And I'm thinking like, you've gone into a merger of your business with other people. So I would imagine there would be sort of like contracts of how you share things. There would be things like, protection things. How do you get out of businesses and everything else? What would be some of the key things that you see that business owners tend to neglect in terms of getting their legal structures right?
Not getting good advice early on, and so they go for the cheapest, quickest, and easiest structure to start with, which then becomes very difficult to transition into a more appropriate structure later on. I get that finances and cash is tight when you're starting out, but it's good to spend what little money you may have at that time wisely. So, my advice is I still haven't come up with a good reason as to why you would ever operate a business as a sole trader or a traditional partnership. I just don't. I don't understand the mentality of that. You've got the concept of unlimited liability. That is, every asset you have is on the line compared to the limited liability regime you can put in place with just a simple private company. If you have business partners, the next thing that is often overlooked because everything's going well and everyone's excited about new business is not putting a shareholders agreement in place. It's an absolute must. You might really like the people you get going into business with. Things might be great, but you don't say that about insurance, do you? You still go and get an insurance policy for your contents or your public liability or those sorts of things because you acknowledge, oh, look, the worst could happen. And the same attitude needs to be taken with your business partners in terms of let's hope it's like an insurance policy that you put in the bottom drawer and never have to refer to again. But if you do, you've got it there. And so many disputes or misalignments between business owners could be reasonably and cost effectively and quickly resolved if there was a well-drafted shareholders or partnership agreement in place, but just such a low percentage of people put them in place, unfortunately.
Yeah, the excitement that gets of starting a new business and we're going to do this, we're going to jump in, we all know each other, we've worked together, whatever, we've got a bit of history. It takes a really wise head to be able to say, to the people involved, this could and there's a fair chance things can go wrong, and you need to contemplate now what that looks like. But it's in the spirit of if we're going into this as friends or as partners, we want to make sure that there is a graceful way out, which often gets overlooked.
Yeah, and look, things change over time, right? Like you might go in thinking it's a little side hustle and it goes gangbusters, and I hate to say it, but we're all human. Money changes people, right? And so you might have gone in with one thought process, but then it changes along the way, or, life happens. Things happen in people's lives that change their position. They might be going through a separation and puts financial stress on. Like there's so many unanticipated things that I think you just have to be courageous enough and put your pride to one side at the start of business to say, we're hoping for the best, but we're planning for the worst in terms of let's get all this structural stuff in place. And if it goes great, we'll never have to worry about it. It's more about what if it doesn't go the way we want it to.
Some of the other things, Malcolm, that obviously a lot of businesses get involved with. We were talking about leases earlier and things like that. What are some of the sort of the key legal instruments that small business owners face that and or any quick tips that you might have about how they can use those in the most effective way for their own businesses, but also in a well balanced way, because it's a contract between two different parties.
Yeah, look, I mean, I tend to talk to clients about the business life cycle, and there is a whole bunch of relationships. And if you just try and break it down as simply as you can, you'll have internal relationships. So that's between business partners, right? Mm-hmm. We've just spoken about that. You'll then have further internal relationships with your people, your staff, whether they're employees or contractors. And you'll have external relationships, so with your clients and your suppliers. And then you will actually also have external relationships like with the government, but also just the general public. And so long as you're aware of where each of your key legal relationships are, and you understand them at least at a simple level, and you have the right documentation in place for those relationships, you're doing well. A lot of people don't tend to understand that business is more than just the customer-business relationship. There's a whole bunch of other relationships involved in running a business that are really important to get right.
You can see why managing a small business is so complex, because you've just outlined, 6, 7, 8 different types of relationships, that any one of which could have a really positive or a really negative effect on the business itself. And then that flows, if it goes skew, it flows through to the owners and their nearest and dearest. I'm really keen just to try to prize out your sort of your best advice to someone who's listening in, they're doing it hard basket, either because they've got debt that's overhanging and the business has suffered, or they've got a legacy lease. Either way, we're talking about business owners that are carrying a financial burden.
Yep.
And from my, I've seen where it is. You talked about it. Put your head in the sand is one approach. It can seem scary. It can seem like you're giving up. It can seem like it's going to cost too much, and I don't have anything. So, where would you be directing those people, and what layers of advice would you be suggesting that they try to find?
Yeah, okay. A really, really, really good question that's got lots of, as you said, lots of different layers to it. So at the simplest level, don't bury your head in the sand. Get the right people around you, and the critical people in that scenario are going to be a good accountant or financial advisor. I don't just mean someone who's going to do your returns for you. I mean someone who's going to sit and look at your books and go, why is your business not going? It's all good and well to say a business isn't going well. Well, what does that result in other than negative thoughts? We've got to actually look at the source and go, okay, it's not going well, but let's figure out why. Because once you know the why, you can then take the appropriate corrective action. And sometimes there is nothing you can do, and that will take you down another path where, depending on the severity of it, you might then be talking to insolvency professionals. And as a result of COVID, there have been changes made to the insolvency regime in Australia at the moment, which promotes, and I'll put a caveat on this, I know a bit about it, but I'm not an insolvency expert, but we do have those here at Coleman Greig. But it promotes getting early advice and putting a plan in place to help trade out. It's promoting, rather than businesses just folding overnight, it's promoting trying to trade out in the best interest of that business's creditors, but also the business itself. Okay,
so there's an assumption there that that your numbers can improve,
yes,
because you understand where you've been and what's causing the issues.
That's right. And the regime requires that you've sought professional advice and that you actually have a plan, and that will normally need to be written, plan of what you're going to do to trade out. You can't just go, I'm going to keep going along as I am now and just hope. There's actually got to be, I've gone and gotten that professional insolvency advice, and I have a plan in place, and I'm going to stick to it and trade out. And you get a window of time there where you would be protected from things like insolvent trading and those sorts of things, which can open up personal liability for directors.
Yeah.
If it's not that extreme, the other thing that can be put in place is, once you know the why, You can go and have conversations with the relevant people. You can ask for extended trading terms with your suppliers. You can talk to your landlord about some rent relief. You can talk to your banks, because even though I kind of put the boot into them earlier, they do have the ability. And I got a letter in the mail, unsolicited letter from my bank the other day saying, hey, how are you going in COVID? Do you need help or not? So there are the ability to have the conversation with the bank to take some of that pressure off. Now, it's not going to be forever. So you can't just do the whole, which is what I think, to be honest, happened with a lot of business in the GFC, was there was so much money flushed into the economy that I'm not sure a lot of businesses that probably needed to make changes back then did, because they rode the wave of that expenditure. But now it's come around where they're like, oh, goodness, we've got the same problems now that we had back then, because they didn't actually make any changes. So, look, you've got to understand the internal mechanics of your business and why things might be a problem, because once you then know what the problem is, you can address it.
Yeah, no, look, it's unfortunately it's a great way to finish our discussion, Malcolm. I think it's very powerful that, and I think you're saying, unless you really understand your numbers and what's going on in the business, you're really in the dark, because from there you can take a couple of different routes, and they all involve getting counsel or expert advice. And the message, I think, strong and loud, is don't put your head in the sand, and analyze and talk and find a way through, or decide it is too hard. Hey, Malcolm, look, thank you very much for your time today. I think we probably could have rolled another session, and perhaps we'll do that, but I really appreciate your time today. We've been chatting with Malcolm Campbell from Coleman Greig in Sydney. Really appreciate your time, Malcolm.
Thanks for having me on.
So that's all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. Anthony and I continue to be inspired by bringing you small business experts and other small business owners and hearing their stories. For any of the links, resources or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact Anthony or myself, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com, or you can find us on both Facebook and Instagram. Anthony and I would love you to tune in at the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.